I'll be reading from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. This narrative also takes place as Jesus is approaching the cross toward the end of his earthly ministry. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he's gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Lord, look, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Well, Luke chapter 19 has inspired a song that almost every little child has learned. Right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. And it goes through the rest of the song, and the resolution is that Jesus takes him into his house. It's a faithful summary of part of this narrative. But one of the problems with that song is that it doesn't focus on the true problem. What's the problem in the song? The problem in the song is that Zacchaeus is short, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man. He couldn't see Jesus, so he climbed up in a tree. Then he could see Jesus. And then Jesus took him to his house. Now, is that the problem in the story, in the biblical narrative? The problem in the biblical narrative is not that Zacchaeus was short. The problem in the biblical narrative was that Zacchaeus was, what? Lost. He was lost. It's no sin to be short. It's no problem to be short. It might be an inconvenience. But he was lost. He was rich. He was powerful. He was influential. And he was lost. He had charted a course for his life, expecting to find his life. But in the process of selling his soul for money, he had completely lost his way. Zacchaeus is lost. The good news for Zacchaeus was that Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. Now, when Jesus says that he came to seek and save the lost, what he's saying first and foremost is that he came to save and seek the lost sheep of Israel. Right? That's what he says in Matthew 15, verse 24. And Zacchaeus was one of these sheep. He was a lost sheep of Israel. He was a son of Abraham according to the flesh. He's a Jewish person. He has a Jewish name. He's described here as a son of Abraham who has come home, who has come to salvation. But you see, by unbelief, Zacchaeus had been cut out of the family line. He was one of those whom Paul describes in Romans 9, the first few verses. He was an Israelite to whom pertained the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the service of God, and the promises. Verse 4. But he was nonetheless accursed verse 3. All of these things Zacchaeus had thrown away. The covenant, the promises, the service of God. And as a result, he was lost. Now, just dwell on that for a moment. He was a member of the church. He was a member of the Old Testament people of God. But he was lost. Are there not people today in the church who are lost, as Zacchaeus was? Those who have been given so much light, so much privilege, so much blessing, like Zacchaeus, but are utterly lost. But you see, the good news is that it wasn't only for the lost sheep of Israel that Jesus came, seeking and saving. Christ says in John 10, verse 16, there are other sheep who are outside of this fold, and these are also lost. The fold of God here represents the redeemed people of God, the church. It's a congregation of people who are united by faith to their shepherd, Jesus Christ. And Jesus says, outside of this fold, outside of Him, there's no hope. They're lost. You know what it feels like to be lost. It's terrifying. Well, outsiders of this fold have no hope and no true life. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. A lost person hardly ever finds himself, even in things in our world. A person who's lost in the woods is probably going to stay lost in the woods until someone comes to them. Having been lost in the woods myself on one occasion, I understand that what happens is you just go in circles. Your mind, your brain just sort of leads you to slightly lean in one direction as you walk, and you just end up going in circles. You rarely find your way. You need a seeker. You need someone to come and seek after you and find you. God is a seeker. God is a seeker. The 19th century British poet Francis Thompson affectionately refers to God as the hound of heaven. The hound of heaven. Well, hounds are known to seek after and find lost things, right? You just give them a whiff of a piece of clothing that the person who's lost was wearing, and the hound strikes out, and he may not sprint. The hound may take his time, but plods along, and eventually he finds the person. Thompson recounts how he deliberately fled from God, got himself lost. But throughout his life, Thompson felt being followed by feet that moved, in his own words, with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace. Unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace. God was seeking after him. And notice in this case that Christ sought Zacchaeus by name. Who told Jesus that the silly little man up in the tree was named Zacchaeus? Well, maybe he knew him. Maybe not. But Jesus comes to that tree, he looks up at him, and he says, Zacchaeus, come down. Because Jesus knew who he was looking for. He was looking for lost sheep. And he knew that Zacchaeus was one of them. The name of Zacchaeus had been inscribed upon his hand since before the foundation of time. And now he's found. He calls him by name. And of course, Zacchaeus recognizes his voice. Right? Jesus says, my sheep know my voice, and they will answer me. So Zacchaeus comes down from that tree, and then he comes to know what an anonymous author would write 1,800 years later. I sought the Lord, and afterward I knew. He moved my soul to seek him, seeking me. It was not I that found, O Savior true. No, I was found of thee. God found Zacchaeus. That's why we understand what people mean, but it really doesn't make sense when a person says, I found God. I found religion. I found God. God finds people who can't find him. Zacchaeus climbed into that tree out of curiosity. He wanted to see Jesus. Who didn't want to see Jesus in that day? Zacchaeus climbed into that tree out of curiosity. Jesus called him by name because he was seeking him. God drew, in other words, Zacchaeus into that tree for Jesus to find him. Why are you here? I realize that's a blunt question, but why are you here? Maybe you're here out of curiosity. Maybe you're here out of custom. Maybe you're here out of obligation. I know a number of people are here because they love the Lord and desire to be here to worship him. But even if you're not here for a noble reason, God draws his people, just as he drew Zacchaeus up in that tree, so he could call to him and so that they could hear him. And so God calls to us now. And he says, I've come to seek and to save the lost. Relent to Christ's pursuit and be saved. That's one of the reasons he came, after all, to seek and to save the lost.